Well, welcome everyone to another awesome session with our data-driven community. As you all know, every month we do a specific topic where we'll talk for about 45 minutes here. Today's session is great. We've got a featured guest, Jared Schulman, who's going to be talking about Tableau calculations. So, with these data-driven communities, we're always trying to get better. We'd love to hear feedback from you, and please tell your network that we do these. It's totally free, as you know. Anyone can join. So we're really excited. Today's agenda, like I mentioned a minute ago, we've got Jared Schulman. He's our lead consultant at Zeomatrix. He's going to be giving our tech talk today on mastering Tableau calculations. I'll do a few community announcements here in a minute. And like we do every session, we'll have time for Q&A at the very end here. All right. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Just remember, please observe customary Zoom webinar etiquette. We definitely want you to participate. So if you have questions, comments, please make those comments in the chat window. I'll be taking a look at those and monitoring. We'll certainly have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation. And then as always, a link to the recording will go out following the session. Every recording, by the way, is on YouTube as well. Couple of upcoming events. On November 8th, we'll have our next data-driven community session. I just came up with this title yesterday. Let me know what you think. It's going to be called Harmonize and Parameterize. As you can probably guess, we're going to be spending the entire session talking about parameters, specifically how you can create dynamic parameters in Tableau, how they can be more useful and harmonize your Tableau dashboard. So I don't know. It was off the cuff. I looked at words that end in IZE, and that's how we came up with harmonize and parameterize. But that'll be a really good session. Jared, I presume you might lead that one as well.
That'd be fun.
We also, so we'll finish out the year in December. It's kind of hard to believe we're already almost in December. So on the 13th at noon Central, we'll have our last session for the year. We're obviously going to continue doing them into next year. So 2 more following today's session. Today, our topic is going to be mastering Tableau calculations. All right. Our featured speakers, Jared Schulman. It's a pleasure to introduce him. I've worked with Jared for a number of years now. He's got over 8 years in the analytics space. He loves Tableau calculations. He's absolutely my go-to person on my team for any Tableau calculations. And we've got some very talented folks that know formulas, but Jared's the best I've ever seen. So I'm really thrilled that he'll be going through the presentation today. Most of you have met me. I'm Stuart Tinsley, Director of Sales and Client Success at Zeo. Used to work at Tableau. I've been in the space 10 years working with Tableau. So we're really excited. Today we're going to cover a couple different areas with Tableau calculations. The first thing we're going to do is kind of give a general overview of what is a formula in Tableau, and specifically, like, how can the calculation editor be helpful? How you can extract some help from the hundreds of formulas that you can actually do within Tableau. Jared will spend some time talking about table counts. He'll spend some time on if-then statements. He'll spend time on date calculations. Level of detail expressions will be talked about today pretty extensively, actually. And if we have time, I've got a timer to go off at 10 till, but we're going to hope to get to very common, like year-to-date, month-to-date, and quarter-to-date formulas in Tableau. All right. At the end, we'll have Q&A. And by the way, please feel free to make chat, make comments in the chat window for any questions that you have throughout. If we can't get to them right there, we'll get to them in the end. And anything that we can't get to today, please feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to help in any way we can. With that, Jared, I'm going to pass it over to you. I'll stop sharing and we can get into mastering Tableau calcs.
Right. Thanks, Stuart. Yeah, I appreciate the intro. It's funny. Stuart and I were talking before we got on this call, and he had that bullet point about me loving Tableau calculations, and I kind of do. He said, we can put anything in there, and I said, no, you can leave that. That's okay. Because I'm like I like solving problems and I like solving puzzles, and I feel like Tableau calculations have a lot in common with that. So let's pop open the calculation editor, and I want to start by showing y'all a few things that Tableau gives us to kind of help with that problem solving and kind of untangling what we have with calculations. So if you've been in Tableau for very long at all, you're probably familiar with the screen. You're probably familiar with this little pop out to the right. This main canvas in the middle is where we're going to actually type all of our calculations. We'll name them up here. But this like help window that pops out on the right-hand side is where I actually spend a lot of my time when I'm working on tougher calculations. This shows us all of the different functions that are available to us in Tableau for writing calculations. Everything from, simple year, where we can just take the year of a date, to like regular expressions are available in here. There's ranking functions, there's percentiles. You can put in like some model extensions, which I haven't done, and I don't know anyone who has, but if there's enough interest in it, hey, maybe we'll cover that someday. But there's just a ton available in here. And one of my favorite things about this is that if you click on any one of these, it's going to give you an example of how to write that calculation. So if we're looking for, let's see, we're looking for something like the length function, it's going to tell us that this is going to return the number of characters in a string. So we can use the length function with a string, and it's going to tell us the number of characters in it. It's really helpful if you ever want to take like just a particular number of characters out of a string, but it's dependent on the length of the string. So things like that, it's really helpful to be able to see what kind of format we need. If we want to make a date, we need to put in that year, month, and day in this format. So the calculation editor does a lot to kind of give us hints and tools at what we need to build the calculations that we're going to build. That's where I go anytime I get stuck. If I'm curious, hey, can I do X, Y, or Z with a date? You can pull this drop down and look at all the different date functions. And you might say, oh yeah, I wanted the actual like month name of a particular date, and there's a date name function for that. So there's a ton in here. I mean, you can look at all the different string calculations, anything that's just numerical calcs. This sort and the search are really helpful for things like that as well. All the different table calcs that are available to you, and we'll touch on a couple of these later and how to build some of those pretty quick and easy. So hopefully that covers enough of the calculation window. You can easily get lost in here, but they give you the tools that you need to find your way back to. And if we want to start talking through just some real common basic calcs, the sort of like bread and butter that you're going to use all the time, if then is probably, if not at the top of the list, then towards the top of the list. And what this would look like is if we wanted to take a look at all of our product subcategories and how many sales we had in each of them. This visualization technically tells us that. This is okay, but it doesn't really help us pick out the most important information super quickly. And it might help if we sorted it. So we can sort it down here, excuse me, on the axis. And now we've got it sorted. And so we can see what our top categories are, but we kind of have to bounce back and forth between this axis and the bars to figure out where exactly are some of the cutoffs between the different types of subcategories and how we might treat them. So if we wanted to see what are some of our high selling subcategories and our low selling subcategories and everything in the middle, we can write an if then calculation for that. And so we'll come over here into the calculation editor. We'll just call this if then for the example. And we'll say if the sum of sales in a subcategory is, say, greater than 200,000, then we're going to call that a high selling subcategory. Otherwise, else if the sum of sales is above 100,000, we're going to call that like a mid selling subcategory. And if it's not above 200,000 and it's not above 100,000, then we're just going to say else it's a low selling subcategory. And once we have that calculation built, it's going to tell us the calc is valid. We can hit OK on that. And if we drag this pill out, now we can see that it's going to categorize those for us. And we'll probably want to bring low down here to the bottom. And that's kind of helpful too. But if we drag this over onto color, now all of a sudden with that one calc, we can easily get an idea of where our subcategories go from high selling to mid selling to our low selling subcategories. Just very quickly, visually. And if we go back a few steps and compare that to this view, the difference in how quickly you can pick up on like the top selling subcategories is pretty drastic. So those if thens are some of the most common calcs that we'll use. Another way that we might see those is we see that we have chairs and phones as our top two categories here. And if we ever wanted to just keep an eye on those two subcategories and see how the sales were going for those two subcategories compared to our overall sales, we might pull out our total sales, about 2.3 million. And then if we wanted to, we could filter that by subcategory and look at just chairs and phones. And we can see that's about 667,000. But then we lose the context of what our overall sales number is. So instead of filtering, one of the things we can do is we can create a calc just for chairs and phones. And we can say, if the subcategory equals chairs or the subcategory equals phones, then give me the sales for that. And once we have that, if we drag that out and just drop it right on top, now we can see our overall sales and our chairs and phones right next to each other. So if we filtered to chairs and phones, we'd lose that context. But by using an if-then calc, all of a sudden we can see both side by side and get an idea of how much of that sales is made up by chairs and phones. And while we're here on this calc, I want to point out a couple of things in this calculation editor. So on the if-then calc, we had used sum of sales for those subcategories. And if we wanted to do the same thing on chairs and phones, and we wanted to sum the sales, we're going to run into a super common error. And Tableau is going to tell us that we can't mix aggregate and non-aggregate comparisons for if expressions. And the same thing is going to happen for any calculation, that you're mixing an aggregate like a sum, min, max, or average with non-aggregated fields like subcategory. So there's a couple of ways that we can get around this, one of which is to move the sum to the outside of the calculation. So now we're not saying if the subcategory equals chairs or phones, then sum the sales. We're saying we're going to take a sum if the subcategory equals chairs or phones. And the way that Tableau reads it, it's now looking at all of these three fields in a disaggregated fashion and then aggregating it, versus what we had before, where we were asking Tableau to look at a disaggregated subcategory and then give us an aggregate number on top of it. And Tableau just doesn't like mixing those aggregate and non-aggregate fields. The other option that'll work sometimes is the attribute function will aggregate a dimension field if the level of detail for it only returns a single value. So if I do this here, it's going to give me a red pill because it is now trying to sum an aggregate field. But if I drop the aggregate there, it's giving me a blank. And what that tells me is that I have that attribute function on something that's returning more than one value. If we bring that subcategory out, now we can see it's actually giving me a value for chairs and phones. But if we take subcategory out of the view, it's trying to aggregate something that's returning multiple values. And Tableau is not going to play nice with that. So in that sort of situation, we would want to stick to just moving that sum to the outside if we needed this to be an aggregate expression. And if we do that, again, we can't sum a sum, but if we bring that back out, that sum changes to ag because it's already aggregated, and we still get our 667. So
I feel like I just learned something, Jared. Just having you go through that and raise your hand like virtually if you've come across that error in Tableau, mixing aggregate. That is, I feel like, super common in the product.
Yeah, if you're building out a thick enough report, you're going to get to the point where you have an aggregate field that you're trying to compare to something that's not aggregated, and you're going to have to find a way around it. There's a couple other wonky workarounds that are like edge cases where you could even use level of detail expressions to turn an aggregate into a non-aggregate field. But you can get into some dangerous waters with changing your level of detail in that instance. So we'll save that for the mastering session. So yeah, hopefully that helps to shed some light on if-thens, some of the different intricacies of calcs and aggregations. Let's switch gears for a sec and let's talk about date calcs. So we can see our sales here. If we're curious about how long different things are taking to ship, we can look at our customers and their orders. And then if we wanted to see their ship dates, I'm going to just type it up here and we get ship date. And we can compare that to our order date. But then we're doing math. We're starting to say, okay, well, what's the ship date minus the order date? How many days is that? We can just write a calc for that instead. So this is going to be ship time, and we're going to take a date diff. And as soon as I hit that enter key on that autocomplete, it does two things. It's giving me the format that I need to put this in. So it's telling me that I need to specify the date part, the start date, and the end date. And optionally, I can specify the start of week. So if you're in a business or an industry where your week starts on a Tuesday instead of a Sunday, or I know in a lot of the entertainment business, their week goes Friday to Thursday or Thursday to Wednesday, you can specify a different start of week there. And that gives an example down here where it's specifying Sunday, but you could put any day of the week in there that you want. So for our purposes, we want to know the number of days, and we're going to put that in single quotes because that's what it shows in the example. I want to know the number of days between the order date and the ship date. We're not going to specify a start of week because it's not relevant to this calculation. So once we do that, then we can bring this out to here. And we're starting to see, okay, yeah, from the 18th to the 24th is about 6 days. Now this one's interesting because we see from the 7th to the 8th is 3 days. And the reason that that's happening is because we are summing the ship time. And if you think about this from a business standpoint, there may be multiple rows of data per order, but they're all going to ship together. And if we want to check for that, we can pull out this product name and we can see, yeah, okay, there are actually 3 different products in this order. And the date diff that we created is giving us 1 from the 7th to the 8th is 1 day, but it's actually summing it 1 for each product name. So probably what we want to do there is we just want to take a min, a max, or an average of that date diff, because the number of days is going to be the same for the whole order. And we don't care how many items are in that order for this purpose. We just want to know how long it took to ship. And if we check a few others, we're seeing, yeah, it's 4 days from the 27th to the 31st, from the 18th to the 22nd, that's 4 days. And we're in a pretty good place there. That's going to tell us how long each individual order took to ship. Now, if we want to know how long the orders take to ship across each region, for example, then we can do that as well. So we can take our region field and we can take that ship time calculation, and it's going to default to a sum. I'm guessing it's not taking 9,400 days to ship products in the central region. If we change that to an average, now with that date diff, we can see it takes a little bit longer in the central region to ship products out than it does in the east or west, which may be relevant or interesting for your business. You can also do the same thing if we expand this hierarchy out on region and look at it by state or province. If we do that, and let's say we want to sort this by the average ship time, then we can start to pick out where things are taking the longest to ship. And by far, Newfoundland and Labrador takes the longest to ship. That kind of makes sense. If you're familiar with Canada, Newfoundland and Labrador are out there. District of Columbia, that's right in the middle of everything, but maybe it just takes them a little longer to get things together because there's so much going on over there. But that'll give us an idea there of where some of our pain points are. You know, some places it takes practically no time at all to get stuff shipped out, but we can see at that top end of the range where it's taking a little bit longer.
Jared,
also, oh, go ahead.
No, sorry. No, you could finish your thoughts. I have a thought too that's probably worth covering. Go ahead.
Go for it. I was about to move on.
Well, in that date diff formula, it's probably also worth mentioning that you could use the today function, right? If you didn't have, like in this data set, we have order date and ship date, but you could subtract a date range against today, and you would just use the today function, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that today function, let's use that over in the next step here. So if we wanted to look at dates for the last time that a customer purchased, and we wanted to compare that to today and say, how long has it been since the last order that they made? That's a perfect use case for that today function. So if we bring out our customer name and our order date, we can kind of take a look and see, okay, so Aaron Bergman purchased last on November 10th, 2022, which is somewhere like 11 months ago, just under. Aaron Hawkins, his last order date is actually in the future, which may be some weird data. This is a dummy data set, so that's going to happen. Aaron Smaling last purchased about 8 days ago, but it's going to take us a really long time to go through 5,066 rows of data and try to pick out how long it's been since everyone has last ordered. So instead, we're going to go ahead and create a calculation for that. And part of this calculation is going to be identifying the latest order for each customer. And that's going to get into fixed level of detail calculations. We're going to call this last order per customer, and we're going to use a fixed level of detail calc for this. Fixed is one of the options that we have for LODs. There also includes and excludes that we can maybe hit on if we have time. They're a little less common. I've probably used an include or an exclude 5 or 10 times over the years, but fixed is probably in 20-30% of the dashboards that we build, at least. The way that fixed detail calculations work is we're going to specify the dimensions for the level of detail that we want to see, and then what the aggregated expression is. So in this case, we've got it all up in the title here. We want to see per customer, what is the last order? And the last order is going to be the maximum order date. So this expression here is exactly what we have up here. We're just looking for the max last order per customer. And that's how every fixed calc you ever write is going to be. It's going to be per blank colon. This is what we want to see. So per customer, we want to see the last order date. And if we bring that out onto the rows shelf, now we can see, okay, Aaron Bergman's last order was November 10th. Aaron Hawkins was December 18th. Aaron Smalings was October 3rd. And it's going to assign that to every row per customer because that's the level of detail that we set in the calculation. And from there, we can use that today function that you were talking about. We can say, what is the date diff in days between the last order date per customer and today is its own function. This will update every day that you open this dashboard. It's just going to default to today. So you don't have to change anything. There's no like filter or parameter setting that you have to do. Today is just today. And if we bring that out, then we can start to see it's been exactly 335 days since November 10th, 2022. And if we skip over some of the bad data, Aaron's mailing's been 8 days since October 3rd. Alex Russell last purchased on September 10th. It's been 31 days since then. And it makes it really easy to check and see when's the last time we engaged with this customer. This is another really popular one for things like login dates. If you're monitoring cloud software and someone's saying, this software is just terrible. I really don't like it. It never works for me. And then you see that they last logged in like a year and a half ago. Like, I think you're just not using it. So date diffs for like last order, last login, last activation can be really helpful for trying to monitor activity and check back in on customers or clients who maybe haven't been engaged in a little while. Does that help with that today function?
I think you nailed it. Yeah, that's absolutely perfect. So I'm hearing in this example, this is great analysis for like repeat customers. I mean, we're looking at retail, but it expands that, like looking at churn, looking at all different types. It could drive some insights there.
Yeah, I mean, we could really go as far as to, go back to the if then and start bucketing. I guess we won't go through it here, but you could say, if they haven't ordered in the past year, then put them in a special category for follow-up. If they've ordered in the past month, put them in a category for someone to make sure that they reach out and check in and say, hey, how was your order? Was everything what you expected? Is there anything we can help with? It can really help like for customer follow-up and retention. Yeah.
So this might be a question people have, because I know I had this question. Why did we need to fix that first formula on days since last, or I think you call it, time since last order, or sorry, last order per customer was the fixed formula. But maybe if you could spend like a minute, Jared, just for context for the folks here, like why did we have to fix it at the customer name?
Yeah, so if we just wanted to look at max order date, this is another little tip and trick. Stuart, you actually showed me this one a while back. You can just highlight something here in the calc window, and you can just bring it out and like drop it on your rows shelf without having to go and like create a new calculation or bring out order date and then set it to the max. So I want to make sure that that is discrete. So the reason that we fix it at the customer name level is because if we bring out that max order date, it's looking at it at the level of detail of the visualization. And right now we have customer name and order date in the view. So when it looks at max order date without the fixed level of detail, we're just seeing the max order date per row on the crosstab that we have in the view. And that doesn't really give us what we're looking for. If we took this time since last order and put max order date in there. Let me bring that back out. All of a sudden we've got a whole bunch of different numbers here. And we could take, the minimum of this and say, okay, well, what's the lowest number of days between today and their previous orders? But it's a lot quicker to just identify that maximum order date and use that to get the date diff between there and today.
That's great. That's a really good explanation of that. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful for folks on the call of why I had the same question like a long time ago. Like, why do I need to fix this at a customer name? It just didn't inherently make sense to me. So that's a really good explanation.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot of times where you'll want to use fixed calcs. Really, any time that the level of detail in the view is different from the level of detail that you want to see for the data. I'm trying to think, like, I'll clear this sheet. We can do a quick example of this actually. If we had sales by state out here, this is great. We can see, per state what our sales are, and we could see which states are in which region. And if we wanted to, we could even take like a percent of total for each state. This is getting into table calcs that we'll jump into in a minute. We can look at that per pane. And now all of a sudden we're seeing what the percent of sales for each state is within each region. But if we didn't want region in the view, that breaks because now the pane is just every single state. So instead, if we want to just have that sum of sales and still see what the percent of sales within the region is, we can still do that with a fixed level of detail calc. If we want to see the sales per region, then we can again take a fixed calc by region and take the sum of sales. So now, even though we don't have region in the level of detail in the view, we can see the sales per region compared to the sales per state. And with that, we can take the sum of sales, which is going to be at the state level because that's what's in the view, and compare that to the sum of sales per region, which is going to be at the region level because that's where we fixed it. So this is our percent of sales within region. And now, without having region in the view, if we format this to a percentage instead of a whole number, we can still see the sales by state and how much of that state's region those sales make up. And if we bring the region back out, we can see, let's take some subtotals. Each of these adds up to 100. So these percentages are giving us the percent of sales by state within each region, even when we don't have region in the view. So we can use level of detail expressions to either calculate or view data at a completely different level of detail from what's in the view. Does that make sense?
That made sense to me. Yeah, thumbs up if that was helpful. Yeah, that was great.
I'm always like trying to figure out if there's a better way to explain level of detail calculations because it's like it can be tricky for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. You're
I'm
getting
seeing
some
some
thumbs
thumbs
up
though,
here. So
so
I
that's
think that was
good.
great.
All
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah. Awesome.
I don't know if I've ever had like a really, really good
Tricky.
explanation for why level of detail and how it works. But it's one of those things that like the more you do it in Tableau, the more it's going to make sense to you and the more it's going to become second nature. And it's like being plugged into the matrix. You just start seeing like numbers coming down your eyeballs and you can like see inside the fixed level of detail calcs.
Yeah, the practice.
So
That's
yeah.
practice and data. Right. That's awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah, great example. I know you've got the next one that is probably going to involve another level of detail. That's really exciting.
Yeah, this one, I really like this one. This came from Kate, another one of our Geomatrix colleagues. And what we're going to do here is we're going to say, we want to see our customers and we want to know like which subcategories they've ever purchased. So we want to see their sales by subcategory, but we want to know how many of them have purchased all of some number of subcategories. So if we pull out our subcategory filter here and we want to see who's purchased like accessories and appliances, we can kind of see like who's got numbers in both rows, but it's tough to really like just get a quick idea of who all those people are. There's 600 rows on this sheet. But if we use a bit of a funky level of detail calculation, we can get to that answer. So let me
This
pull up
this
my
will be
notes over
recorded,
here.
so as you write it, it's recorded. You can come back and extract the logic too. This is a really good one.
So this calculation is going to tell us whether or not that customer has purchased all of the subcategories that were filtered to. There's going to be a few steps to this one, so we'll build it out and then we'll explain it. But we're going to take just an overall fixed count distinct of subcategories. And this is another little time-saving hack. We could have also written that as fixed with nothing to the left of the colon, and then take the count distinct of subcategories. But if we're not going to fix at any particular level of detail, we can actually leave out the fixed and the colon so that we just have that curly bracket count distinct of subcategories. So we want to know if that overall distinct count of subcategories in the data is equal to what each customer has for their count distinct of subcategories. So we want to know, do all of the subcategories in the view equal the total number of subcategories for that customer? And what am I missing here? I'm missing my there we go. So that's what we want to know. We want to know, does the total distinct count of subcategories equal the distinct count of subcategories for the customer? If we hit OK on this, and we bring this filter out, it's only going to show us false because of something that goes on in the background of Tableau's logic. But instead of picking true, we can also pick to exclude false, and that's going to give us the same result. When we first do this, we're going to see nobody. The reasoning for that is Tableau's order of operations. So before we get too deep into the level of detail of this, what we want to do is talk about the order of operations. The most common place that you'll run into this is between fixed level of detail calculations and dimension filters. And what's happening is Tableau calculates fixed level of detail calculations before it calculates dimension filters, which means when we do this calculation for customers purchasing among all subcategories, it's counting all of these subcategories, all like 15 or 20 of these, before it takes into account the fact that we filtered to only 2. And it's doing the same thing for the customer name. So if we want to get out in front of that fixed level of detail calculation, we need to move this filter before the fixed level of detail calculation in Tableau's order of operations. And we do that by adding this to context. Tableau's context is determined before the fixed level of detail calculations are calculated. So when we move that filter to context, it turns gray, and that tells us this filter is happening before fixed level of detail calculations. If you just search Google for Tableau order of operations, there's a really good tech note that has like a flow chart that goes through exactly what's happening in each step. And I would just like print that out and have it next to my desk, because you're going to run into it every now and then, and it's a really helpful visual guide. But now that we've done that, now that we've moved the subcategory filter before the fixed level of detail calculation, we're seeing all of these customers who have purchased in these 2 subcategories. So now our filter is working. Our calculation is saying the distinct count of subcategories overall, these 2 that we've selected, does that match how many subcategories these customers have purchased in? If they've only purchased in 1, they won't show up. But if they've purchased in both of them, that 2 subcategories is going to match the 2 subcategories overall. And if we add a third one, well, all of a sudden we have 152 rows instead of 218. So we have 218 people who have purchased accessories and appliances, and we have 152 who have also purchased art. And we can keep on going down the list until we have practically nobody. We have 33 now that have purchased the first 5 subcategories alphabetically. Chairs takes it to 21, copiers. So only 2 customers have purchased all 7 of the first alphabetical subcategories. But this can be really helpful if you're looking for, something exactly like this. If you're looking for people who cross shop different products or different categories, if you're looking for people who are enrolled in, multiple educational programs, if you do some kind of online training programs or things like that, you can build this view to get an idea of, hey, who's cross shopping art and machines? It's these 64 people. And these are the folks who you might target with a marketing campaign about some sort of machine that also does art. That might be something they'd be interested in.
Yeah, part of this is like it's all fictional sales data, but and we probably have people on the call that is super relevant, but encourage you to use your imagination about the analysis over the data that you might be seeing and how it could be used. It's a really, really powerful formula.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great example. Yeah, thumbs up if that one's good. That's one that we thought would be a good one to show.
Yeah, this is definitely getting into advanced Tableau calcs and ways to use Tableau, and you throw this on a dashboard and let end users kind of play around with it, they'll have some fun.
Definitely.
So yeah, that might be one to revisit on the recording and test that one out, throw it up the chain at your workplace and see how people get a kick out of it.
Yeah.
All right, we're doing pretty good on time here too. I think we've got enough time to at least get through table calcs. So let's talk table calcs. And let's see, if we wanted to talk table calcs, I mean, even just a percent of total. So if we go back to subcategory and we wanted to look at subcategory sales, again, this is great. It's nice to see the total sales, but if we wanted to know how much of the sales these different subcategories made up, there's a really quick and easy way to do that. There's these quick table calculations. So we've got, running totals for time series data, difference, percent difference. We'll use this percent of total, and that's going to tell us that, okay, chairs and machines seem to make up, or chairs and phones rather, seem to make up the bulk of the sales that we have. It's a good 28%. So that's like a quarter of what we've got going on. If we wanted to see this by order date, we could see how that trends over time. So now we can see per year, what are the percentages. We make sure if we add totals here, that's gonna, yep. So 100% per year. And we can get the row grand totals as well. So we can see how that changes over time. Chairs started at 16.2% in 2020 and it's down to 13.15 in 2023. We can take this sum of sales, and if you're on a, Stuart, keep me honest, if you're on a PC, I think it's hold control and click. On a Mac, it's the command key. You hold that and you click and you can duplicate this field. We'll drop it on color. And then if we change this mark type from text to square, now we have a heat map and we can see visually those colors lightening up in chairs and phones. We can see, some different spikes. Machines dropped from 12 to 5 and back up to 9. That sticks out. Binders has been, pretty consistent in the 7s, 8s, 9s. We can see the growth in accessories from 5 to 8. So that jumps out really quickly. If we wanted to see the percent difference, so that actual growth and dropping by year, we can change this quick table calc to a percent difference. And we'll do the same thing for the color so that we can make sure we're looking at the same thing. And now all of a sudden we're seeing, oh, okay, so fasteners, which before were not sticking out, we're seeing a lot of growth in fasteners. People are really trying to staple stuff, paperclip things together. Those are selling, like hotcakes. The growth is crazy. And even supplies dropped really hard in 2021, 86% less. but then had a really big rebound in 2022. So maybe that was just all of the hoarding during COVID in 2020. People bought enough supplies and decided that they didn't need to buy any in 2021 before they jumped back. So that percent difference can be really useful too when you're looking at tables, to get an idea of how things have changed over time. One of the things, if we go back to the percent of total view, we can take this and we can make this into an area chart as well. And all of a sudden we're seeing like this, it's almost like an archaeological sample where we have all these layers and we can visually see how those things change over time. And this is using that same table calc that took us like one click to build. Well, that's kind of a neat view when you can see things growing and changing over time. I'm trying to think, is there anything else on table calc, Stuart? There's a whole lot of other options
Yeah,
for table calcs.
maybe just like the compute, like yeah, compute using is probably
Mm-hmm.
worth just touching on for a second, if that's unfamiliar to folks.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a minute. So if we look at this like little mini menu inside the menu for our table calcs, there's this compute using option. And we saw this a little bit earlier when we were looking at state sales by region, and we picked like pane down. And that was going to look at the state sales within each region because it was splitting the panes on the window by region. But in this, we just have the one table. And so we're calculating things by table down right now, which means we want to know what percentage of sales were accessories within 2020. And if we switch that to table across, we'll see our numbers all change. I'm going to switch this one as well. And all of a sudden now, what we're asking to compute by table across. So we're saying for accessories, what percent of sales were in 2020, as opposed to what percent of sales in 2020 were accessories, which is going to be down. We're looking across what percentage of accessories sales were in 2020. And there we can see that big jump that we saw in percent difference in fasteners. 72% of the fasteners that we've ever sold were sold in 2023, which is pretty wild. Almost half of the copiers that we've ever sold were sold in 2023. So there's a big jump in the need for copiers between 2020 and 2023. So yeah, that's where we can start to see some of that difference between table down and table across. If we picked like sell, everything would be 100%. What percentage of accessory sales in 2020 were accessories? 100%. I don't know if I've ever found a use case for sell. And yeah, if we picked like just table, then all of a sudden we want to know what percent of sales were accessories in 2020 out of all of our sales and all of our subcategories. And you can see that shift in where the percentages add up to 100. Before we were looking across. So out of the 100% of accessory sales, how many were in 2020? Now we're saying, okay, our total sales were 7.19% accessories and 21% of our sales were in 2020. But what percentage of our sales were accessories in 2020? And that was 1.08%. If you add up the whole table, then it becomes 100. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I know we have time probably for one more example. You've got teed up year to date, month to date. Do we have time? Make sure we have a little time for Q&A. Yeah, why don't we whip through that and then we'll get to Q&A.
Yeah, so year to date, quarter to date, month to date, this is a great place to leave it too, because this is going to transition really well into parameters next time. So for those of y'all who are here right now, if you come back next time, we're going to talk about year to date, quarter to date, month to date with parameters to make this even more dynamic. But for now, this is going back to the date calculations that we were talking about. So if we have year to date sales, all that we want to do for this is we want to say if the year of the order date is equal to the year of today, we want to know, okay, it's in the same year. And we saw some weird data with future orders that we think is probably bad data. No one's ordered anything 2 months from now yet. So we want to make sure that this is an order that's already happened too. So the order date is less than equal to today. Then we want to see those sales. So this is just saying the order was within the current year. The year of order date equals the year of today. And the order date was not after today. It was before or on today. We want to see all of those sales for year to date. And we can bring that out and we can see that that's 488,299. And we do the same thing for quarter. So for quarter to date sales, this is going to be a little bit different because we're not just looking at the year. We need to split that year up. So in this case, we can say if, and we're going to truncate the date. We're going to truncate the order date to the quarter level, which means it's going to take all of the dates, all of the order dates, and bump them back to the start of the quarter. And so we just want to know if we move all the order dates back to the start of the quarter, does that match if we bump the date of today back to the quarter level? So this is just going to tell us, is this in the current quarter? And if it is, give us the sales. And so we can drop that there. And our quarter to date sales are 287,104. Oh, but you know what? While we're there, we should do the same thing and make sure that we're not getting any future orders. So we still want to make sure that the order date is less than or equal to today. And we can watch that number change. That makes a lot more sense. Because if the quarter is October, November, and December, we're only 11 days into that quarter. So it's probably not $200,000 yet. Now, because we're currently in that quarter that's going to be October, November, December, if we build out a month to date calculation, it's probably going to look exactly the same. We're going to use the month in the date trunk, order date, and we want to see if that equals the date trunk at the month level of today. So if that equals the month of today and that order date is on or before today, then we want to see the sales. And because this quarter starts in October and that's where we are, we should see 29,836. So that's real quick. I don't want to duplicate that. I want to edit it. The name's bugging me. 3 calcs to real quick get year to date, quarter to date, and month to date. And then when we circle up next time, we're going to be talking through how do we parameterize these so that we can dynamically look at the year, quarter, or month to date sales for past dates as well, and not just for today.
Yeah, I think we could throw in a custom option too, maybe for that. So we have the option for a user to click on year to date, month to date, week to date, quarter to date, then an option where it would give a range that they could pick from.
Mm-hmm.
So, more customization than you can get with an out of the box relative date filter is what we're going after for that. Jared, that was awesome. We have 5 minutes left, so I want to give some time for any questions that come in. So yeah, if there are any questions, please use the chat window, and we are happy to answer some questions that come in. As we're waiting, Henry, did we answer your question about errors with level of detail? Now we can try to come back to that one. Okay, awesome. That was a thumbs up. Awesome. Yeah, as we're waiting for more questions, I know one that has come up a lot that I've heard is, Jared, best resources for getting better at calculations. Any come to mind that you've picked up and learned along the way?
Yeah, I mean, Tableau's community forums are just phenomenal. Yeah, anytime that I've searched anything related to Tableau, I've found posts from other people who had the same questions. And I say that as someone who, before I started at Zeomatrix, I was almost always on a team of one. So I was learning Tableau myself, as some of you might be, just trying to figure it out as I went, and being able to access some of the experience of other people who had run into the same issues and figured it out was just phenomenally helpful. So those forums, the community forums and the help forums for Tableau, are the first place that I would go if I didn't have a brain trust of super smart people working with me like I do now.
Yeah. Yeah. Plus like troubleshooting. So you can go there for learning, but also if you've got an error that's coming up, going to the forums can be helpful too. To get
Mhm.
some insight. Um, that's great. I always think Tableau Public too. Like I've learned a lot of tricks, especially with
Oh, yeah.
formulas and parameters from you find a workbook on Tableau Public that the author is made downloadable and you can sort of reverse engineer the functionality with your data. That's been really helpful for me. Really just taking someone else's idea when it comes down to it. But that's what's great about Tableau. It's so open in that way. Yeah. Any other questions that are coming through? Okay.
Yeah, I think even though we already answered Henry's question, I do want to just touch on some other common errors that you might get with fixed calcs. We can kind of talk through, if we ever tried to take like just a fixed sales, we're going to get an error because the results of the fixed calc need to be an aggregate. So particularly when you're 5, 6 layers deep in calculations, that'll be a really quick tip that a calculation you're trying to use isn't already an aggregate. So that's one that might cause errors. And then the flip side of that is if we take that fixed sum of sales and we try to compare that to something else. So if we said like, if subcategory equals chairs, then sales. And let's say we want to sum that. So we take the sum of if subcategory equals chairs, then sales, and we want to divide that by the fixed sum of sales. Well, we took the fixed sum of sales, so we'd think that would work, but that fixed calculation is not an aggregate calculation. It's just using an aggregate in the calculation. So that can be confusing. But if we wanted to do this, subcategory equals chairs divided by sales, then we would actually need to sum this because that is not itself a fixed calculation, or not an aggregate. Rather, the fixed calculation is not inherently aggregated. So that'll be another error that you could run into using fixed calcs.
That's a tip right there, I think, Jared, that you might have touched on, but worth covering. Like you're using a formula that you've created before in a new formula. And if you click where it says fixed sales, like click on sales, like the measure. All
Mm-hmm.
right. So then click on fixed sales. So in that, if you leave that pop-up window open, if you're ever nesting calculations, you'll have the window that'll pop out to show you what formula was used that you might have built prior, which I've found to be really helpful too, if you start nesting formulas.
Yeah, I mean, if we wanted to like look back at what our if then calculation was to check the logic, we can just
Mm-hmm.
pull it up right here without even having to
Yeah.
go out of the editor.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
this
You can
window.
check it right there. You can drag it. You can copy the whole string, post it in, test it. Yeah. It's helpful tips.
Yeah,
Cool.
and you
Whenever
were.
right at time. Yeah.
Oh
You have
yeah.
another one? Yeah. Yeah. We got 1 minute. Yeah. Go
I
for it.
was just going to say, you were talking about testing, and when you have errors in calculations or if the math doesn't look like it's working out, the one thing that I'd recommend is you can comment lines out in Tableau.
Mm.
So if you hit 2 forward slashes, that's going to take this, fixed sales out of the calculation, and it's only going to show this top part. So particularly for percentages like this, if you're running into issues where the percentages don't look right, you can do that. Or like you were talking about before, you can just click and drag this side of the calculation out and see, okay, what is that giving me versus what is this giving
Yeah.
me? And you can use that to do some validation as well.
That's such a good point. That's been really helpful for validation. I feel like a lot of people probably spend time in validation mode. That's a really good tip. Well, ready
Yeah.
time. Jared, thank you so much. That was awesome. Hope this was valuable for the folks on the call. We'll get these recordings out. And we will see you in November for parameters. So we'll likely have Jared, and we'll be going more in depth on how to use some of those formulas in a more dynamic way with parameters, harmonizing and parameterizing, I think we called it. So great to see everyone again, and we'll see you in November.